She was 7 months pregnant, standing in a ballroom full of 500 people, watching her husband take the stage. She smiled, expecting him to thank her. Instead, he reached for another woman's hand, and then he announced that woman was also pregnant with his child, in front of everyone, while his wife stood frozen, humiliated, erased. But here is what Alexander Grant did not know about the woman he just destroyed. He did not know she had been quietly documenting his lies for years. He did not know that his company was built on frauds she could prove. And he did not know that his wife's grandmother, the grandmother everyone believed was dead, had left her a $2 billion inheritance. The wife he discarded was about to become the most dangerous woman in New York. This is the story of how Olivia Bennet lost everything, vanished without a trace, and returned to burn his empire to the ground. Stay with me until the end. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. The ballroom glittered like a palace from a dream. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with gold leaf, casting warm light across 500 of New York's most powerful people. Champagne flowed freely, laughter echoed off marble walls. The orchestra played something elegant and forgettable while photographers prowled the edges of the room, hunting for the perfect shot. Olivia Bennet stood near the entrance, one hand resting gently on the curve of her belly, watching her husband work the crowd. At 30 years old, 7 months pregnant, she should have felt like a queen tonight. This gala celebrated Grant Financial's most successful quarter in company history. Her husband, Alexander Grant, had built this empire from nothing, and tonight the world was gathered to applaud him. But something felt wrong. She couldn't name it exactly. It was the way Alexander's hand had slipped away from hers the moment they stepped out of the car. The way his eyes scanned past her when she spoke. The way he positioned her just slightly behind him in every photograph, as if she were an afterthought rather than his wife. Olivia smoothed her midnight blue gown and told herself she was being paranoid. Pregnancy hormones, exhaustion, the stress of planning a nursery while her husband worked 18-hour days. An older woman in diamonds approached her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Grant, what a brave choice, attending in your condition." Olivia blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The dress, dear. Midnight blue. So bold for a pregnant woman at a work event." The woman's gaze dropped to Olivia's belly with something like pity. "I suppose some wives feel the need to remind everyone they still exist." Before Olivia could respond, the woman glided away, leaving behind a cloud of expensive perfume and the sharp sting of humiliation. Olivia's cheeks burned. She looked around the room, suddenly aware of the glances being exchanged, the whispers hidden behind champagne flutes. Something was happening tonight. Something everyone knew except her. The orchestra stopped. Alexander took the stage. He looked magnificent up there, Olivia thought. Tall, silver-tempered at 42, with the kind of commanding presence that made people lean forward when he spoke. She had fallen in love with that confidence once. It had felt like safety then. Now, watching him smile for the cameras, she wondered if she had ever really known him at all. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Alexander's voice boomed through the speakers. "Grant Financial's success belongs to many people. Our investors, our board, our incredible team." Olivia smiled, waiting. Surely he would thank her. She had spent 5 years supporting this man, sacrificing her own career, standing beside him through every crisis. She was carrying his child. Alexander's eyes swept the room. They passed over her without stopping. "But there is one person who deserves special recognition. One person who has been absolutely essential to everything we've accomplished this year." Olivia straightened, her heart lifted. Alexander extended his hand toward the crowd. "Madison Clark, would you join me on the stage?" The room seemed to tilt. Olivia watched as a woman rose from a table near the front. Young, beautiful, brunette. Her red dress clung to her curves as she walked toward the stage with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed this moment. Madison Clark, Alexander's PR director. The woman who always seemed to be in his office when Olivia called. The woman who laughed a little too loudly at his jokes during company dinners. "Madison has been my partner in every sense of the word," Alexander continued, his arm wrapping around Madison's waist. "Her vision, her strategy, her unwavering support have made this company what it is today. And I am proud to announce that she will be taking on an even larger role in my life. The crowd murmured. Cameras flashed. Olivia couldn't breathe. Madison leaned into Alexander, her manicured hand sliding across his chest. She whispered something in his ear, and he laughed. Actually laughed. Then he turned back to the microphone. Madison and I are also expecting a child together. Our family is just beginning. The words hit Olivia like a physical blow. She staggered backward, catching herself on a nearby table. Crystal glasses trembled. Someone gasped. Madison was pregnant. Madison was pregnant with Alexander's child. While Olivia stood here 7 months along with his baby, her husband was announcing his mistress's pregnancy to 500 witnesses and a dozen photographers. "Isn't that his wife?" a woman whispered nearby, loud enough for Olivia to hear. "She's pregnant too," another voice replied. "Oh my God, this is brutal." Olivia's vision blurred. The room spun around her. She saw Madison smile at her from the stage. Not a cruel smile, something worse. A pitying smile. The smile of a woman who had already won. Every instinct screamed at Olivia to run, to scream, to collapse. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the shock and the humiliation and the shattering of everything she thought she knew, a small voice spoke clearly. Not here, not in front of them. You will not give them that satisfaction. Olivia straightened her spine. She removed her hand from her belly, and with all the dignity she could summon, she turned and walked toward the exit. Her heels clicked against the marble floor. Each step felt like walking through broken glass. She kept her chin up, her eyes forward, her face carefully blank. She would not cry. She would not stumble. She would not let them see her break. Behind her, Alexander's voice continued. He was thanking the board now, thanking the investors, thanking everyone except the woman who had given him 5 years of her life. He never called her name. He never even looked. Outside, the November air hit Olivia like a slap. She made it 3 steps before her legs gave out. She caught herself against the stone wall of the building, gasping, her whole body shaking. The city lights blurred through her tears. Somewhere above her, music played. People laughed. Her husband celebrated his new life while she stood alone in the cold, everything she believed in crumbling to ash. Her phone buzzed. Then again, then again. The clip was already going viral. She could see the notifications flooding her screen. Mentions, tweets, headlines forming in real time. Grant CEO introduces Mistress at gala. Wife watches in humiliation. Pregnant wife abandoned on stage. New York reacts. The other woman? The upgrade? Who wore it better? Olivia turned off her phone. She pressed her hand against her belly, feeling her baby kick, and she made a decision that would change everything. She was going to disappear. Not forever, just long enough to think, long enough to plan, long enough to figure out who she was when she wasn't Alexander Grant's wife. A taxi pulled up. The driver rolled down his window, took one look at her tear-stained face and designer gown, and asked gently, "Where to, miss?" Olivia gave him an address. Not the penthouse, not any of the places Alexander knew. Somewhere safe, somewhere she could fall apart in private. "Good party?" the driver asked as they pulled away. Olivia laughed. It was a broken sound, dark and hollow, but it was real. "The best," she whispered, "the absolute best." The apartment in Queens was small, 2 bedrooms, aging appliances, a window that looked out on a brick wall. It smelled like coffee and lavender candles, and it belonged to Rachel Morrison, Olivia's college roommate and the only person she could think of at 3 in the morning when the world collapsed. Rachel had answered on the first ring. She hadn't asked questions. She had simply said, "I'm putting fresh sheets on the bed. The door will be unlocked." Now Olivia sat on Rachel's couch, wrapped in a blanket, a mug of tea cooling in her hands. She had been there for 6 hours. She hadn't slept. She wasn't sure she would ever sleep again. Rachel emerged from the kitchen with toast and sat down beside her. "You should eat something. For the baby." Olivia stared at the toast like it was a foreign object. He announced her pregnancy in front of everyone, while I was standing right there. "I saw the video." "Everyone saw the video. It's everywhere." Rachel's jaw tightened. "It's going to be okay. We're going to figure this out." "How?" Olivia's voice cracked. "He planned this. This wasn't an accident, Rachel. He wanted people to see. He wanted to humiliate me publicly so that when the divorce happens, everyone will already think I'm the pathetic wife who got replaced. The words hurt to say out loud, but once she started, Olivia couldn't stop. I gave him 5 years. I gave up my career. I moved into his world, learned how to smile for cameras, learned how to be the perfect CEO's wife. I thought we were building something together. I thought when the baby came, things would be different. Olivia had always wanted a family. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep them fed, she had dreamed of creating something stable, something safe, a home filled with warmth and bedtime stories, and the kind of love that didn't disappear when things got hard. Alexander had seemed like the answer to that dream. He was older, successful, confident. He had swept her into a whirlwind romance, filled with roses and rooftop dinners and promises whispered under the Manhattan skyline. He told her she was his muse, his reason to believe in love again. She should have known it was too perfect. "When did you first suspect?" Rachel asked quietly. Olivia closed her eyes. "I didn't want to see it. There were signs, late nights that didn't add up, business trips where he was unreachable for days. The way he started criticizing everything I did. My cooking wasn't good enough. My dress choices were wrong. My career was small and insignificant compared to his billion-dollar deals." She had started keeping a journal, not consciously at first, just little notes when something Alexander said didn't match what he had said before. A meeting that moved from Tuesday to Thursday, a client dinner that became a solo trip to Boston, numbers that didn't align when he talked about the company's profits. She thought she was being paranoid. Now she realized she had been documenting his lies without even knowing it. "Do you still have the journal?" Rachel asked. Olivia nodded slowly. "It's in my bag. I grabbed it without thinking." "That might be important." "For what? A divorce?" Olivia laughed bitterly. "He has the best lawyers in New York. He has unlimited money. He's already controlling the narrative. I'm the crazy pregnant wife who couldn't keep her husband. What chance do I have?" Rachel took Olivia's hands in hers. "You have more than you think. You're smart. You're strong. You survived growing up with nothing and built a real career before Alexander ever came along. That woman is still in there." Olivia wanted to believe it, but the woman who had walked out of that ballroom felt like a stranger. The woman she used to be felt like a ghost. The next week passed in a blur of pain. Olivia couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop replaying that moment in her mind. Alexander's hand reaching past her, Madison's triumphant smile, the whispers spreading through the crowd like poison. The media made it worse. Headlines screamed from every screen. Photographers camped outside Rachel's building after someone leaked Olivia's location. She learned to keep the curtains closed, to avoid mirrors, to measure her days in small survivals. One meal eaten, one shower taken, one hour without crying. Alexander's calls came constantly. 47 missed calls in the first 3 days. His voicemail shifted tone like a manipulation playbook. First came anger. "Pick up the phone now. We need to discuss this like adults." Then came false concern. "Olivia, I'm worried about you, about the baby. Let me know you're safe." Finally came the threats, wrapped in velvet. "If you don't respond, I'll have to assume you're not mentally stable. Do you really want lawyers involved?" Olivia didn't respond to any of them. For the first time in 5 years, she refused to answer when Alexander Grant called. And somewhere in that silence, she began to find something she had lost. Her own voice. Let me tell you something about hitting bottom, because most people misunderstand what it means. Hitting bottom doesn't mean you have nothing left. It means you finally see clearly what you need to survive. The fog of denial lifts, the excuses stop working, and you have to make a choice. Stay down or start climbing. Olivia made her choice on the 7th day. She woke up, looked at her reflection in Rachel's bathroom mirror, and barely recognized the woman staring back. Pale skin, red-rimmed eyes, hair unbrushed. She looked destroyed, but she also looked awake. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "Okay, he wants a war. Let's see who's actually been paying attention." She pulled out her journal, pages and pages of notes, dates, numbers, inconsistencies. She had thought she was tracking her own paranoia. Now she realized she had been building evidence. She started making calls, old contacts from her interior design career, colleagues who had always been kind, a forensic accountant's wife who owed her a favor after Olivia had designed their apartment below cost. Piece by piece, Olivia began to understand what Alexander had really been doing while she played the dutiful wife. Grant Financial wasn't thriving. It was drowning. The company had been hemorrhaging money for 2 years, covered up by creative accounting and inflated projections. The gala wasn't a celebration. It was a desperate performance designed to attract new investors before everything collapsed. Alexander wasn't a genius. He was a fraud. And Madison Clark wasn't just his mistress. According to the whispers Olivia was starting to hear, Madison was the one actually running the schemes. She had positioned herself as indispensable, feeding Alexander's ego while quietly building her own power base within the company. The picture was getting clearer. Alexander had humiliated Olivia publicly to control the divorce narrative, yes, but there was more. If the company's true condition came out, if investigators started looking, if the lies unraveled, Alexander would lose everything. Olivia had stumbled into something much bigger than infidelity, and for the first time since the gala, she felt something other than pain. She felt dangerous. Rachel found her that evening, surrounded by papers, her journal open, a legal pad filled with notes. "What are you doing?" Olivia looked up, and something new flickered in her eyes. "I'm figuring out what he's really been hiding, and then I'm going to make him pay for every single lie." Rachel stared at her for a long moment. Then she smiled. "There she is. I was wondering when you'd come back." 2 weeks after the gala, Olivia sat in a sleek conference room in Midtown Manhattan, facing a man who promised to change everything. Daniel Hayes was handsome in that polished, professional way that lawyers cultivate. Early 40s, salt and pepper hair, kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He had come highly recommended through Rachel's network, a divorce attorney who specialized in protecting women against powerful husbands. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, using her maiden name as she requested, "I've reviewed everything you've shared. Your husband's public humiliation of you at the gala, combined with the documentation you have kept, gives us significant leverage." Olivia leaned forward. "What kind of leverage?" "Enough to negotiate a substantial settlement. He embarrassed you in front of witnesses and cameras. Any judge will see that as deliberate emotional cruelty. Add in the pregnancy, and we have a compelling case for significant alimony and child support." It sounded good, too good. But Olivia had learned to be suspicious of things that seemed easy. "What about his company? The financial problems?" Daniel's expression sharpened with interest. "What do you know about that?" Olivia pulled out her journal. "I've been keeping notes for years, inconsistencies in what he told me about meetings, deals, travel, numbers that didn't add up. I thought I was being paranoid, but now I'm not so sure." She walked Daniel through what she had discovered: the shell companies, the inflated revenue reports, the desperate attempts to attract new investors before the house of cards collapsed. Daniel listened intently, occasionally making notes. When she finished, he sat back in his chair with something like admiration in his eyes. "This is remarkable. You've essentially done preliminary forensic accounting without any professional training." "I have a good memory for numbers. My mother used to say I could spot a lie in a tax return from across the room." Daniel smiled. "That gift might be about to pay off. If what you're describing is accurate, we're not just looking at divorce leverage, we're looking at potential fraud charges. That changes everything." For the first time in weeks, Olivia felt hope, real, tangible hope. She had an ally. She had evidence. She had a path forward. "What do we do next?" she asked. "First, I need to verify your documentation. Cross-reference your notes with public filings, see what matches. Then we approach Alexander's lawyers with a settlement offer. If he's smart, he'll pay to make this go away quietly. And if he's not smart?" Daniel's smile turned cold. "Then we make his life very uncomfortable." Olivia walked out of that meeting feeling lighter than she had in months. The sun was actually shining. She caught her reflection in a window and didn't look away. The woman staring back still looked tired, but there was something else there now, something fierce. She was going to win. That feeling lasted exactly 4 days. Olivia was at Rachel's apartment, organizing her notes for Daniel when her phone rang. His name flashed on the screen. "Good news?" she asked. The silence on the other end made her stomach drop. "Olivia, I need you to come to my office. There's been a development." 45 minutes later, she sat across from Daniel, watching his face and knowing before he spoke that everything had changed. "Alexander filed first," Daniel said quietly. "His lawyers submitted paperwork this morning." Olivia's mouth went dry. "What kind of paperwork?" Daniel slid a folder across the desk. "He's demanding a paternity test. He claims there's doubt about whether the baby is his." The words didn't make sense. "That's insane. There's no one else. There's never been anyone else." "I believe you, but he has photographs." Olivia opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were images of her at various locations around the city, appearing to be intimate with a man she had never seen before. Doctored, obviously doctored, but professionally convincing at first glance. "These are fake," she whispered. "We'll prove that, but it takes time and money." There was more. Alexander was also demanding a psychiatric evaluation, claiming Olivia had exhibited erratic behavior. He had statements from household staff, from his own employees, all painting a picture of a woman becoming increasingly unstable. And the final blow, he had frozen all joint accounts. Olivia had no access to any money. "He's not trying to divorce you," Daniel said grimly. "He's trying to destroy your credibility so that when this goes to court, you look like an unstable, unfaithful wife who can't be trusted with a child." Olivia felt the hope she had been building crumble around her. "What do I do?" "We fight. It's harder now and it's going to take longer, but we fight." She nodded slowly, but something cold had settled in her chest. Alexander wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a man willing to fabricate evidence, destroy her reputation, and potentially take her child to protect himself. She had underestimated him. She wouldn't make that mistake again. The next 2 weeks became a war of attrition. Olivia worked constantly, rebuilding her case piece by piece. She recreated portions of her journal from memory, filling in gaps, adding new details she had remembered. She reached out to more contacts, carefully always watching for who might report back to Alexander. And then she found her opportunity. Through a connection at a spa she used to frequent, Olivia learned that Madison Clark had a standing appointment every Thursday afternoon. Private room, 90-minute massage, phone off. If Olivia could get Madison talking, get her to admit something, anything, it might balance the scales. The plan was risky, probably stupid, but Olivia was running out of options. She disguised herself as best she could. Different hair, glasses, loose clothing that hid her pregnancy from casual observation. She booked an appointment at the same spa, same day, and waited. Madison appeared right on schedule, glowing with the confidence of a woman who believed she had already won. She barely glanced at the dowdy woman waiting in the lobby. Olivia timed her approach carefully. A chance meeting in the relaxation room, a shared cup of tea, an introduction as a freelance journalist writing about women in business. Madison, predictably, couldn't resist talking about herself. "I've had to fight for everything," Madison said, sipping herbal tea in a plush robe. "Men like Alexander, they don't take women seriously. You have to prove yourself every day." "That must be exhausting." "It is, but worth it. I've completely transformed Grant Financial's public image. The gala was my vision, my execution. Alexander just reads the scripts I write for him." Olivia nodded sympathetically, her phone recording silently in her pocket. "It must be frustrating, doing all that work and not getting credit." Madison's smile turned sharp. "Oh, I get credit where it matters. The board knows, the investors know, and soon everyone will know." Over the next hour, Madison revealed more than she realized. Details about financial strategies, references to accounts that sounded suspicious, complaints about Alexander's inability to make decisions without her guidance, and then the gold. Madison mentioned a specific offshore account, laughing about how Alexander didn't even know it existed. "Emergency fund," she called it, "for when things get complicated." Olivia left the spa with a recording that could change everything. She brought it to Daniel the next morning, triumphant. "I have her. She admitted to fraud. She talked about hidden accounts. This is exactly what we needed." Daniel listened to the recording. His face was unreadable. "This is good," he said finally. "Really good. Let me analyze it. Put together a strategy. We might be able to use this to pressure Alexander into a settlement. How long? Give me a few days. I want to do this right. Olivia walked out feeling something she had almost forgotten. Hope. She had taken action. She had gathered evidence. She was fighting back, and for the first time, she believed she might actually win. She was wrong. 3 days later, police arrived at Rachel's apartment, two officers stone-faced with papers in hand. Olivia Bennett, we have a restraining order requiring you to maintain a distance of 500 feet from Madison Clark. Olivia stared at them in confusion. What? I haven't been anywhere near her. Ma'am, we're just serving the order. Miss Clark has also filed a criminal complaint alleging harassment and stalking. They showed her Madison's evidence, a recording of Olivia, her voice unmistakable, apparently threatening Madison, threatening to destroy her, threatening to make her pay. The words were Olivia's, pulled from different contexts, edited together seamlessly into something she had never said. Madison had known about the spa meeting. Madison had recorded their conversation too, and Madison had turned Olivia's weapon against her. The next day, Madison held a tearful press conference, pregnant, vulnerable, terrified of the unstable ex-wife who was stalking her. The narrative flipped overnight. Olivia wasn't the wronged woman anymore. She was the jealous, dangerous villain. And that's when she realized the worst part. How had Madison known about the recording? How had she been prepared with a counter-recording, perfectly edited, ready to deploy? There was only one answer. Someone had told her. The only person Olivia had shared the recording with was Daniel. When the betrayal finally came into focus, Olivia was sitting in Rachel's kitchen at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, staring at her phone. She had trusted Daniel completely. She had given him her journal, her evidence, her strategies. She had told him everything, and he had sold her out. The confirmation came through a blocked number. Madison's voice, smooth as silk and sharp as broken glass. Did you really think I didn't know? Daniel has worked for me for 3 months. Every move you made, every piece of evidence you gathered, I knew about. Olivia couldn't speak. You're not smart enough for this, Olivia. You never were. Enjoy being a single mother with nothing. You've earned it. The line went dead. Olivia sat in the dark, her phone clutched in her hand, feeling the last of her hope drain away. She had fought, she had planned, she had believed she could win, and she had lost everything. The next 48 hours destroyed what little Olivia had left. It started with smoke. Rachel was out of town for a work emergency. Olivia was alone in the apartment, unable to sleep, pacing the small living room at 3 in the morning. Her mind kept circling the same questions. How had she been so blind? Who else was working against her? What did she have left to fight with? The smell hit her first, acrid, chemical, wrong. By the time she saw the smoke seeping under the door, flames were already climbing the stairwell. Olivia didn't think. She grabbed her phone, the clothes she was wearing, and ran. The hallway was filling with black smoke, thick enough to choke. She couldn't see the stairs. She couldn't breathe. Somewhere behind her, glass shattered, and the roar of the fire grew louder. She made it to the fire escape by memory, her lungs burning, her eyes streaming tears. 7 months pregnant, she climbed down 3 flights of rusted metal stairs in bare feet, her whole body shaking. When she hit the ground, she collapsed on the sidewalk. Firefighters were already arriving. Residents poured out of the building in various states of undress. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Someone else was asking if she was okay. She wasn't okay. Everything she had was in that apartment. Her recreated journal, her notes, the backup copies of her evidence, the clothes Rachel had given her, the small collection of baby items she had started accumulating for her daughter. All of it burning. The fire marshal would later determine that the blaze was arson. Accelerant had been poured in the stairwell and ignited. Someone had done this deliberately. Someone had tried to kill her. The stress hit her body like a freight train. Standing outside that burning building, watching her last hope turn to ash, Olivia felt something wrong. A pain, sharp and insistent, radiating through her abdomen. The paramedics reached her just as her water broke. The ambulance ride was a nightmare of pain and terror. She was only 32 weeks pregnant. Too early, much too early. The EMT kept telling her to breathe, to stay calm, but calm was impossible when her baby was coming, and there was no one beside her, and everything was falling apart. At the hospital, they rushed her into the delivery room. Doctors spoke in urgent voices. Machines beeped. Someone put an IV in her arm. Someone else told her to push. She pushed. She screamed. She prayed to a God she wasn't sure she believed in. And then, after what felt like hours, she heard a sound that broke through the chaos. A crick-cry, thin and reedy, but alive. Her daughter was alive. The doctor placed a tiny bundle on her chest, so small, so fragile, a scrunched red face and fingers like flower petals. She's early, but she's breathing on her own, the doctor said. We'll need to keep her in the NICU for observation, but she's a fighter. Olivia looked down at her daughter through a blur of tears. Grace, she whispered. Her name is Grace. Because that's what this moment was. Grace in the middle of devastation. Light in the darkness. Something beautiful born from something terrible. Olivia held her daughter for exactly 12 minutes before the nurses took her away to the NICU. 12 minutes of perfect love. 12 minutes of forgetting everything else. And then reality crashed back in. She was alone in a hospital bed, recovering from emergency childbirth with no home, no money, no evidence, and no allies. The people who wanted to destroy her knew exactly where she was, and they weren't done. The man who entered her room the next morning wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase. He didn't introduce himself. He simply pulled papers from the briefcase and laid them on her hospital bed. Mrs. Grant, you've been served. Olivia stared at the papers through a haze of exhaustion and painkillers. Emergency custody petition. Alexander Grant was seeking immediate custody of the baby, citing Olivia's homeless status, her lack of financial resources, her mental instability, and now her reckless endangerment of their child through living in an unsafe environment that resulted in a fire. He was trying to take Grace. You can't be serious, Olivia whispered. Mr. Grant believes the child would be safer in his care. Given your current circumstances, the court may agree. The lawyer left. The papers remained. Olivia sat in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, and felt something inside her finally break. She had fought. She had planned. She had gathered evidence and found allies and believed, truly believed, that she could win. But Daniel had betrayed her. Her evidence had burned. She was lying in a hospital bed with nothing, and the man who had destroyed her life was coming for her daughter. Maybe they were right. Maybe she wasn't strong enough. Maybe she should just give up. The thoughts settled over her like a weight. It would be so easy to stop fighting, to let Alexander take Grace and raise her in his world of money and lies. At least Grace would be comfortable. At least Grace would have things Olivia could never provide. Maybe her daughter would be better off without her. Olivia closed her eyes and let the despair wash over her. And then from somewhere deep inside, a voice spoke. It was quiet at first, almost a whisper, but it was clear. You are her mother, no one else, you, and you don't get to give up. She thought about her own mother, single, exhausted, working 2 jobs to keep food on the table, never complaining, never giving up, raising Olivia with nothing but love and determination. Her mother had never had money or power or connections, but she had shown up every single day. She had shown up. Olivia could do the same. She opened her eyes. The papers were still there. The situation was still impossible, but something had shifted. She wasn't going to win by fighting on Alexander's terms. She didn't have the money or the lawyers or the influence, but she had something else. She had survived. She had given birth alone in the middle of a crisis. She had walked through fire, literally, and come out the other side. Whatever came next, she would face it. Not because she knew she would win, but because her daughter was watching. Because Grace would grow up knowing that her mother never stopped fighting for her. Olivia sat up in the hospital bed, ignoring the pain in her body. She reached for her phone, the only thing she had left, and started making calls. There had to be someone, somewhere, someone who could help. She had no idea that help was already on its way. The man who entered Olivia's hospital room on the 3rd day was not what she expected. He was older, perhaps 65, with silver hair and kind eyes. His suit was impeccable but understated. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. Mrs. Olivia Bennett, he asked. Olivia tensed. Another lawyer? Another threat? Who's asking? My name is James Thornton. I'm an attorney, and I've been searching for you for 6 months. If Alexander sent you, you can leave. James smiled. It was a warm expression, not the predatory smile she had come to expect from lawyers. Alexander Grant has nothing to do with my visit. In fact, I suspect he would be quite unhappy to know I found you. He pulled a card from his pocket and placed it on her bedside table. I represent the estate of Caroline Hartwell. Olivia frowned. I don't know anyone by that name. Yes, you do, though you were told she died when you were 12. James paused. Caroline Hartwell was your maternal grandmother, Mrs. Bennet, and she left you everything. The words didn't make sense. Olivia's grandmother had died of cancer when Olivia was a child. Her mother had grieved deeply. They had attended the funeral together. My grandmother is dead, Olivia said flatly. I was at her funeral. You attended a memorial service. There was no body. Your grandmother did not die, Mrs. Bennet. She staged her death to sever ties with your family after a painful estrangement with your mother. James sat down in the chair beside her bed and told her a story she had never heard. Caroline Hartwell had been a remarkable woman. Born poor, married young, widowed early. She had built a small investment firm from nothing, growing it over 40 years into Hartwell Capital, one of the most respected names in private equity. But success came at a cost. Caroline had been absent during her daughter's childhood, always working, always traveling. When her daughter Eleanor grew up and started her own family, she rejected everything Caroline represented: the wealth, the ambition, the sacrifice of family for success. Eleanor had moved to Ohio with Olivia's father, raised Olivia in deliberate simplicity, and cut off all contact with Caroline. When Olivia was young, Eleanor told her that her grandmother had died. It was easier than explaining the complicated truth. Your mother wanted to protect you from Caroline's world, James said. She believed wealth corrupted people. She wanted you to have a normal life. Olivia thought about her mother, working 2 jobs, never complaining, never asking for help. All that struggle, all that sacrifice, and the whole time her grandmother had been alive, wealthy, waiting. Why are you telling me this now? Because Caroline passed away 8 months ago, peacefully in her sleep, at age 89. She never stopped loving you, Mrs. Bennet, even though she respected your mother's wishes and stayed away. Her will leaves her entire estate to you. James opened his briefcase and withdrew a folder. Upon your 31st birthday, which occurred 2 weeks ago, you became the sole beneficiary of the Hartwell Family Trust. The estate includes liquid assets of $2.3 billion and a 40% controlling stake in Hartwell Capital. Olivia stared at him. The numbers didn't compute. $2 billion, a controlling stake in a major investment firm. This is insane, she whispered. I've been told that before, usually right before people accept it. James smiled. There's one more detail you should know. Hartwell Capital is the primary debt holder for Grant Financial. We own approximately 60% of Alexander Grant's corporate debt. The implications crashed over Olivia like a wave. She owned the company that owned Alexander's debt. She could destroy him with a phone call. James watched her process this information with patient eyes. I've been trying to locate you for 6 months. You have no idea how difficult it is to give someone $2 billion when they keep disappearing. Something that might have been a laugh escaped Olivia's throat. I've been busy. Yes, I've gathered. Arson, emergency childbirth, custody battles. Quite the schedule. Is that supposed to be funny? Merely observational. James leaned forward. Mrs. Bennet, you have resources now, real power. The question is, what do you want to do with it? Olivia looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Alexander, smug and confident, believing he had crushed her completely. She thought about Madison, scheming and manipulating, thinking she had won. She thought about Daniel, selling her out for money, sleeping soundly while her life burned. She could end them all. With this kind of money, this kind of leverage, she could make their lives a living hell. But then she thought about Grace, her daughter, tiny and perfect, fighting for every breath in the NICU. What kind of mother did she want to be? What story did she want to tell her daughter someday about how she won? I don't want to buy my way out of this, Olivia said slowly. Alexander doesn't get to say I only won because of money. James raised an eyebrow. That's not the response I expected. I want to beat him properly, with everything I've built on my own. Then I'll use the inheritance. That's a much harder path. I know, but when Grace asks me someday how I won, I want to look her in the eye and tell her the truth. I want her to know her mother earned it. James studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, and there was something like respect in his expression. Your grandmother would have liked you very much. She said something similar once when investors wanted to buy out her company. He stood and placed his card on her bedside table. When you're ready, call me. The resources will be here. He walked toward the door, then paused. One more thing. There's a man named Marcus Webb on Alexander's board of directors. He was a friend of your mother's, and he's been watching over you for years. You might want to speak with him. James left. Olivia sat alone in her hospital room, the folder of impossible numbers resting in her lap, and tried to process what had just happened. 24 hours ago, she had been ready to give up. Now she had $2 billion in the leverage to destroy the man who had tried to destroy her. But she wasn't going to use it. Not yet. Not the easy way. She was going to earn her victory. And then, when she stood over the ruins of Alexander's empire, she was going to make sure he knew exactly who had beaten him. 3 weeks after James Thornton's visit, Olivia stood in a small office in Brooklyn, surrounded by boxes of documents, facing the most dangerous part of her plan. She had resources now, but she was using them carefully. A modest apartment, paid in cash. A team of investigators working quietly. A new phone that Alexander didn't know about. And most importantly, Marcus Webb. Marcus was everything James had promised. In his late 50s, silver-haired and distinguished, he had been one of Alexander's earliest mentors. But he had also been watching Grant Financial's corruption grow for years, documenting everything, waiting for the right moment. I couldn't move against Alexander without evidence that would stick, Marcus explained at their first meeting. He's too connected, too powerful. Any accusation I made would be dismissed as jealousy or corporate politics. So you waited. I waited for someone who had nothing to lose, someone with a legitimate grievance and the determination to see it through. He looked at her with something like admiration. I didn't expect it to be his own wife. Marcus's files were meticulous. Years of documentation, questionable transactions, falsified reports, connections to offshore accounts. It was damning, but it wasn't enough on its own. We need someone inside to confirm the pattern, Marcus said. Someone who can testify that these weren't mistakes. Someone who knows where the bodies are buried. Olivia thought about this. Then she thought about Madison. Madison was the key. She had been running Alexander's schemes for years, positioning herself as indispensable while secretly building her own power base. If anyone knew the full extent of the fraud, it was her. But Madison wouldn't confess willingly. She was too smart, too careful, unless she thought she had already won. Here is something I have learned about people who believe they are untouchable. They talk. They cannot help themselves. The arrogance that makes them successful also makes them careless. They drop hints in conversation. Show off to impress others, reveal more than they intend because they cannot imagine consequences catching up to them. Madison had that arrogance in abundance. Olivia began tracking Madison's movements, not directly, not in ways that could trigger the restraining order, but through public records, social media, and careful observation from legal distances. Madison was meeting with investors, frequently, privately, without Alexander present. The picture became clearer. Madison wasn't planning to ride Alexander's ship as it sank. She was building a lifeboat for herself, positioning herself as the competent one, the visionary, the person who could salvage something from the wreckage. She was planning to betray Alexander just as she had betrayed Olivia. Olivia could use that. Through a series of careful maneuvers, Olivia arranged for information to reach Madison. Nothing direct, nothing traceable. Just whispers in the right ears about federal investigators asking questions about Grant Financial, about potential charges, about cooperation agreements. Madison, ever paranoid, ever calculating, began to accelerate her plans. Meanwhile, Olivia reached out to others, former employees who had been pushed out, assistants who had seen too much, investors who felt they had been misled. Not everyone would talk, but some would. And slowly, piece by piece, Olivia built her case. Grace came home from the NICU after 4 weeks. Tiny, healthy, perfect. Olivia held her daughter in her arms and felt complete in a way she never had before. "I'm going to give you a good life," she whispered. "I promise, no matter what it takes." The final piece came from an unexpected source. Daniel Hayes had disappeared after the restraining order debacle, fled the state, according to Marcus's contacts. But he had left behind traces, including communications with Madison, that proved he had been her informant all along. When those communications leaked to federal investigators, already building a case based on Olivia's evidence and Marcus's files, the dominoes began to fall. Madison was served with a subpoena 3 days later. Her careful plans, her secret meetings with investors, her positioning as the innocent party, all of it came crashing down when she realized she was facing actual criminal charges. And Madison, true to her nature, immediately began looking for someone to blame. The boardroom meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Alexander believed it was a routine quarterly review. He had no idea that Olivia had been quietly accumulating proxy votes from shareholders who had grown suspicious of his leadership. He had no idea that Marcus had been briefing board members privately about the evidence that would soon go public. He had no idea that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Olivia arrived early. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but not flashy. Her hair was styled simply. She carried a leather folder containing everything she needed. She had imagined this moment 100 times. Walking back into Alexander's world, not as the broken wife he had discarded, but as the force that would bring him down. The reality was quieter than her imagination. No dramatic music, no slow-motion entrance, just Olivia walking into a conference room full of men in expensive suits, taking her seat at the table as if she belonged there. Alexander noticed her first. His face went pale, then red. "What is she doing here?" Olivia smiled. "I'm here as a representative of Hartwell Capital. We hold controlling interest in your corporate debt." She paused. "Did I forget to mention that my grandmother founded Hartwell Capital? Family connections. You understand." The silence that followed was delicious. "Now," Olivia said, opening her folder, "let's discuss the future of Grant Financial." The boardroom was expensive in that particular way that old money cultivated. Dark wood paneling, original artwork on the walls, windows overlooking Manhattan's skyline. It was designed to intimidate, to remind everyone present that power and wealth had weight. Olivia felt none of it. She had faced worse than this room. She had walked through fire. She had given birth alone in a hospital while her life burned around her. A room full of men in suits held no terror for her now. Alexander stood at the head of the table trying to reassert control. "This is absurd. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Olivia, but you need to leave. Security." "I wouldn't do that," Olivia said calmly. "Not unless you want to explain to the FBI agents waiting in the lobby why you're obstructing their investigation." That stopped him. The blood drained from his face. "What investigation?" Olivia placed documents on the table one by one. "This is a record of wire transfers to shell companies that don't exist. These are your authorized signatures. This is evidence that Grant Financial has been operating fraudulently for at least 3 years, inflating revenues, hiding losses, and deceiving investors." Board members shifted uncomfortably. Some reached for the papers. Others stared at Alexander, waiting. "This is fabricated," Alexander said. "My lawyers will tear this apart." "Perhaps, but this might be harder to explain." Olivia placed another document on the table. "This is a report from the arson investigation into the fire that nearly killed me and our daughter. The accelerant used was industrial grade, not available to the general public. Purchases of this type are tracked. The buyer was traced to a subsidiary of Grant Financial." Complete silence. "You tried to burn me alive," Olivia said quietly, "while I was pregnant with your child." Alexander's face twisted. For a moment, Olivia saw the man he truly was beneath the polish. Not a confident CEO, a cornered animal. "That's ridiculous. I had nothing to do with any fire. The records say otherwise, but I'm sure your lawyers can explain it." Olivia turned to the board. "Gentlemen, you're facing a choice. You can continue supporting a CEO who is about to be indicted for fraud and attempted murder, or you can take steps to protect this company and your own interests. One of the older board members, a man Olivia recognized from charity events, leaned forward. Mrs. Grant, if what you're saying is true, why are you here? Why not simply let the authorities handle this? Because I wanted to look him in the eye when it happened. Olivia turned back to Alexander. You humiliated me in front of 500 people. You tried to take my daughter. You tried to kill me. I wanted you to see my face when everything you built comes crashing down. Madison had been silent throughout, sitting beside Alexander with growing alarm. Now she made her move. I had nothing to do with any of this. Her voice was smooth, practiced. Alexander made all the financial decisions. I was just following orders. Alexander whipped toward her. You lying snake. You were involved in every decision. I have documentation proving I raised concerns internally. I tried to stop him. You were the one who suggested the offshore accounts. That's your word against mine. Olivia watched them turn on each other with grim satisfaction. This was exactly what she had anticipated. Madison's survival instinct was stronger than any loyalty. The moment she sensed the ship sinking, she would throw anyone overboard to save herself. Actually, Olivia said, cutting through their argument, we have evidence about both of you. She placed one final folder on the table. Madison, the pregnancy you announced at the gala, the one that was supposed to secure your position as Alexander's new partner. Olivia met Madison's eyes. DNA results are interesting things. The baby isn't Alexander's. Madison's composure cracked. For the first time, Olivia saw genuine fear in her eyes. That's private medical information. You can't possibly, but federal investigators can access many things when building a criminal case. I'm sure you'll have the opportunity to discuss your reproductive choices in detail during your depositions. Alexander stared at Madison, betrayal dawning on his face. The baby isn't mine? Alexander, I can explain. You destroyed my marriage. You convinced me to humiliate my wife in public. You said we were building a future together, and the baby isn't even mine? Madison's mask dropped completely. Oh, grow up. You think I actually wanted you? You're a pompous fool who's easy to manipulate. I was going to take everything and leave you with nothing. That was always the plan. The board members watched this exchange with horrified fascination. Olivia let the moment stretch. Let them see who these people really were. Then she spoke again. Mr. Grant, you have two options. Option 1, resign immediately. Accept the criminal charges that are coming. Cooperate with investigators. Perhaps you'll receive some leniency. And option 2, you fight, and I use every resource at my disposal to ensure you lose everything publicly, painfully, and completely. Your reputation, your freedom, your ability to ever work in finance again. Alexander looked around the room. No allies, no support. The board members had already made their calculations. They were distancing themselves, preparing their own narratives. Wait, Henna, his voice cracked. Why not just destroy me? You have the power. Olivia thought about this question. She had thought about it many times over the past weeks. Because my daughter will ask about you someday. She'll want to know what happened to her father, and I want to tell her that I gave you a chance to be human. What you do with that chance is your legacy, not mine. The silence that followed was absolute. I'll resign, Alexander said quietly. Under protest, but I'll resign. Olivia nodded. A wise choice. She gathered her papers and stood. The board members parted for her. At the door, she paused. Madison, the FBI agents will want to speak with you. I'd suggest full cooperation. Orange isn't really your color. She walked out without looking back. The collapse of Grant Financial dominated the news cycle for weeks. Federal prosecutors announced charges against Alexander Grant: securities fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to arson. The arson charge was the most damning, carrying potential decades of prison time. Madison Clark was charged separately: fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Her careful positioning as the innocent victim fell apart when investigators uncovered her private communications detailing years of calculated theft. Daniel Hayes was arrested in Miami, attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. His cooperation agreement meant he would avoid significant prison time, but his legal career was over. The media coverage was relentless. Every detail of the scandal was dissected, analyzed, debated. Olivia's name appeared in stories, but she refused all interviews. Her role was known, quietly, in the circles that mattered. But she had no interest in public vindication. She had won. That was enough. 3 months after the boardroom confrontation, Alexander Grant stood in a federal courthouse as his sentence was read. 18 years for the combined charges. His lawyers were already planning appeals, but Olivia knew the evidence was overwhelming. He would spend most of his remaining years behind bars. Madison received 12 years. Her sentence might have been lighter, but investigators discovered she had been planning to flee the country with funds she had stolen from multiple sources, including charities she had helped Alexander establish for public relations purposes. Olivia did not attend either sentencing. She was busy with something more important. Hartwell Capital's Manhattan headquarters occupied a sleek tower in Midtown. Olivia walked through the lobby, nodding to employees who recognized her now, and took the private elevator to the executive floor. Her grandmother's office, her office now, looked out over Central Park. The view was spectacular, but Olivia had added personal touches, photographs of Grace, a small collection of books her mother had loved, a framed design sketch from her first professional project years ago. She was learning the business. It wasn't natural for her, not the way her grandmother had reportedly taken to it, but she was determined to understand what she owned, what she controlled, what she could do with these resources. She had already made some changes: partnerships with organizations supporting single mothers, investments in affordable housing projects, a foundation in her mother's name, providing scholarships for women from difficult backgrounds. Her grandmother had built an empire through relentless ambition. Olivia intended to build something different, something that created good in the world, not just wealth. James Thornton knocked on her doorframe. "You have a visitor." Olivia looked up. "I wasn't expecting anyone." "He says he's an old friend of your mother's, Marcus Webb." Olivia smiled. "Send him in." Marcus entered looking lighter than she had ever seen him. The weight of years of watching and waiting had lifted from his shoulders. "I wanted to thank you," he said, taking the seat across from her desk. "I spent almost a decade documenting Alexander's corruption, hoping someone would come along who could actually use the evidence. I never expected it to be you." "Why did you wait so long? You could have gone to authorities years ago." "I tried once." Alexander's lawyers buried it. "He had too many connections, too much influence. Any accusation I made would have been dismissed as a disgruntled board member with a personal grudge." Marcus shook his head. "I needed someone with standing, someone with a story that couldn't be ignored, someone the media would believe. The wronged wife. The wronged wife who turned out to be the secret heir to $1 billion fortune. You couldn't write a story like that." Olivia laughed. It felt good to laugh. She hadn't done it much over the past year. "There's something else," Marcus said. "I knew your mother many years ago. My wife and she were close. When your mother married and moved to Ohio, we lost touch. But I always felt like I owed her something." "Owed her what?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Your mother was extraordinary. Brilliant, compassionate, principled in a way that most people only pretend to be. She could have had any life she wanted. She chose to walk away from wealth because she believed money corrupted people." He met Olivia's eyes. "I think she would be proud of what you're doing here, using the resources she rejected to help others." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. "I wish I could have known my grandmother, the real her, not the story my mother told. Carolyn was complicated, she made mistakes, but she loved your mother more than anything in the world, even when that love wasn't returned. And she watched over you from a distance for your entire life." Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "She asked me to give you this, when you were ready." Olivia took the envelope. Her name was written on the front in elegant handwriting. "She wrote it 6 months before she died. Told me to wait until you'd found your footing." After Marcus left, Olivia sat alone in her office, holding the envelope. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across her desk. She opened it carefully. The letter inside was handwritten, the words careful and precise. "My dearest Olivia, if you are reading this, then I am gone and you have come into your inheritance. I hope you will use it wisely, but more than that, I hope you have found happiness. I made many mistakes in my life. The greatest was allowing my ambition to cost me my daughter. Your mother was right to reject what I represented. I was so focused on building something that I forgot what I was building it for. But I want you to know that I watched you. From a distance, was respecting your mother's wishes, but watching. I saw you grow into a remarkable young woman. I saw your kindness, your creativity, your strength. When I learned what happened to you, when that man humiliated you and tried to destroy you, I wanted to intervene. I wanted to use every resource at my disposal to crush him. But James convinced me to wait. He said you needed to find your own strength first. I hope that strength has carried you through the darkness. I hope you have discovered what I learned too late. That real power is not about destroying others. It is about building something that matters. You are my legacy, Olivia. Not the money, not the company. You. Whatever you choose to do with what I've left you, I know it will be worthy. With all my love, your grandmother, Caroline. Olivia read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in her desk drawer next to photographs of Grace. Outside her window, the sun was setting over Central Park. The city glittered with lights coming on, thousands of lives unfolding in apartments and offices and streets below. She had come so far from that night at the gala. The broken woman who had walked out of that ballroom seemed like a stranger now, someone she had been, but no longer was. Olivia picked up her phone and called Rachel. "Hey," Rachel said. "Everything okay?" "Everything's good. I was just thinking about dinner. Want to bring that guy you've been seeing and come over? I want Grace to meet more people who love her mother." "Yeah, is this you asking for help finally?" Olivia smiled. "This is me accepting that I don't have to do everything alone. That accepting help isn't weakness. That building a family can mean more than biology." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "I think that might be the healthiest thing you have ever said." "I'm learning." Slowly. After she hung up, Olivia sat in the fading light, thinking about all the paths that had led her here. The pain and the betrayal, the fire and the fear, the moments when she had wanted to give up, and the quieter moments when she had chosen to keep fighting. She had lost so much, but she had gained something too, something that couldn't be taken away. She had gained herself. 1 year after the boardroom confrontation, Olivia stood in her new home, watching Grace take her first steps. The brownstone in Brooklyn was nothing like Alexander's penthouse. 3 stories of warm brick, a small garden in back, rooms sized for living rather than impressing. Olivia had designed the renovation herself, combining her interior design expertise with the resources she now had access to. Every detail reflected what she wanted her daughter to learn about home, that it was about comfort, not display, about welcome, not exclusion. Grace wobbled across the living room carpet, arms outstretched, face scrunched in concentration. She made it 4 steps before tumbling into Olivia's waiting arms. "Good job, baby girl. You're doing so good." Grace giggled, already pushing away to try again. She had inherited Olivia's stubbornness. That much was clear. When she wanted something, she didn't stop trying until she got it. The doorbell rang. Olivia scooped up Grace and went to answer it. Marcus stood on the porch holding a bottle of wine and a wrapped gift. "For the little one," he said, presenting the gift. "And for her mother, who I suspect needs it more." Olivia laughed and let him in. Over the past year, Marcus had become something like family, not replacing anyone, but filling a space she hadn't known was empty. They settled in the living room while Grace explored her new toy, a set of soft blocks that stacked and tumbled with the satisfying thuds. "I have news," Marcus said. "The appeals court rejected Alexander's last motion. The conviction stands. He'll serve his full sentence." Olivia nodded slowly. She had expected this, but hearing it confirmed still brought a complicated mix of emotions. "And Madison?" Her lawyer negotiated a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony against several others involved in the scheme. "She'll be out in 8 years." "That seems light." The prosecutor agreed, but her cooperation helped them build cases against 3 other financial firms running similar frauds. Sometimes the bigger picture requires smaller compromises. Olivia watched Grace stack blocks carefully, then knock them down with delighted squeals. "How do you feel about it?" Marcus asked. "Honestly, I don't know. I spent so long wanting them to pay for what they did. And they are paying. Alexander is in prison. Madison's future is destroyed. Daniel will never practice law again." Olivia paused. But it doesn't feel like victory. It just feels like an ending. Maybe that's the healthiest response. Victory implies a winner and a loser. An ending just means it's over. You can move forward. Moving forward. That was what she was trying to do. Some days it felt natural. Other days the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on her, making even small tasks feel overwhelming. Here is something I have learned about healing. It is not a destination you arrive at. It is not a switch you flip. It is a daily choice, sometimes an hourly choice, to keep building something new instead of living in the ruins of what was destroyed. Some days Olivia made that choice easily. Other days it took everything she had. But Grace made it easier. Looking at her daughter, watching her grow and learn and become her own small person, reminded Olivia what she was building toward. Not revenge, not vindication. A life, a real life filled with love and purpose and hope. That evening, after Marcus left and Grace was asleep, Olivia sat in her garden. The city noise faded to a distant hum. Stars were visible faintly above the glow of streetlights. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago, standing in that hospital room, broken and alone, ready to give up. That woman felt distant now, not forgotten, but transformed. The pain she had endured had become something else. Not quite strength, but certainly not weakness. Something more complicated. A deep knowledge of what she could survive. Her phone buzzed, a text from Rachel. Still on for coffee tomorrow? Need to tell you something. Olivia smiled and typed back, of course. Everything okay? Three dots appeared then. Everything is great, really great, but I want to tell you in person. Olivia set down her phone, curiosity piqued. Rachel had been dating someone for the past few months. A gentle man who worked in education and looked at Rachel like she had hung the moon. Maybe there was news on that front. She hoped so. Rachel deserved happiness. They all deserved happiness. The next morning, over coffee at their favorite Brooklyn cafe, Rachel confirmed Olivia's suspicion. He proposed last night. I said yes. Olivia reached across the table and grabbed her friend's hands. Rachel, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. I know it's fast. We've only been together 9 months. But when you know, right? Sometimes the best things happen faster than we expect. Rachel grinned. Says the woman who went from homeless to billionaire in about 6 weeks. That's different. Is it though? They laughed together, and it felt like old times, before the gala, before the betrayal, before everything that had threatened to destroy them both. I want you to be my maid of honor, Rachel said. Obviously. Obviously. And I want Grace to be the flower girl, even if she'll probably eat the flower petals instead of throwing them. That's a guarantee. They talked about wedding plans, about venues and dresses and guest lists, normal things, happy things. The kind of conversation Olivia had never expected to have again during those dark months of running and hiding and fighting. When they parted, Olivia walked home through streets that had become familiar. She stopped at the small playground near her brownstone and sat on a bench, watching children play. A year ago, she had been afraid to go outside, afraid of cameras, afraid of reporters, afraid of what fresh cruelty might be waiting. Now she sat in the sunshine, anonymous and free, and felt something like peace. Not perfect happiness. She still had hard days. She still woke sometimes in the dark, heart racing, memories of smoke and fire pulling her from sleep. She still flinched when she saw Alexander's face in news coverage. Still felt a cold twist in her gut when Madison's name was mentioned. But the hard days were fewer now. The peace lasted longer. The future looked brighter. She was healing. Slowly, imperfectly, incompletely, but healing 1 year later. The charity gala was Olivia's own creation, not a celebration of corporate success, but a fundraiser for survivors of domestic abuse, women who had been where she had been, women who had lost everything and were fighting to rebuild. The venue was elegant but warm, fresh flowers everywhere, donated by a florist whose daughter had been helped by Olivia's foundation. Soft music played, provided by a string quartet composed entirely of scholarship recipients from another program Olivia funded. She had built something real here. Something that mattered, something that would outlast her. Olivia stood near the entrance, greeting guests, accepting compliments with practiced grace. She wore a deep green gown that Grace had helped her choose, pointing at the color with delighted enthusiasm during their shopping trip. Grace herself was backstage with the nanny, probably causing adorable chaos. At almost 2 years old, she had developed strong opinions about everything, especially which events were worth attending and which were beneath her dignity. Mrs. Bennet, a young woman, approached, nervous energy radiating from every inch of her. Early 20s, brown hair, simple dress that looked like it had been purchased specifically for this event. "I'm sorry to bother you. I know you're busy." "Not at all. What can I do for you?" The young woman twisted her hands together. "My name is Emma. I used to work for Alexander Grant. I was his assistant for 2 years." Olivia's smile remained in place, but her attention sharpened. "You worked for my ex-husband." "Yes, and I know things. Things that weren't part of the investigation. Things about other women." Emma's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "He did things, Mrs. Bennet, to other women who worked for him. Women who were afraid to come forward because they saw what happened to you. How hard you had to fight, how much you had to sacrifice." Olivia felt the old anger stir in her chest. She had suspected there were others. Alexander's cruelty had not started with her and would not have ended with her if he had remained free. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because those women saw what you did. They saw you win. And we thought maybe you could help." Olivia looked at this frightened young woman, saw herself in her nervous posture and hopeful eyes. A year ago, she had been just as scared, just as alone, just as convinced that fighting was useless. But she had fought anyway, and she had won. Not because she was special, not because she had secret resources or hidden strengths, but because she had refused to give up, because she had made the choice over and over to keep fighting. "Tell me everything," Olivia said. Later that night, after the gala had ended and the guests had gone home, Olivia sat in her office with James Thornton and Marcus Webb. Emma's story was recorded, documented, ready to be added to what would become a much larger investigation. "This is going to be complicated," James warned. "Alexander is already in prison. Pursuing additional charges against a convicted felon rarely changes his sentence significantly." "I don't care about his sentence," Olivia said. "I care about the women he hurt. I care about making sure they know they're not alone. I care about creating a record so that if anyone ever tries to rehabilitate his reputation, the truth will be there." Marcus nodded slowly. "You've changed. When we first met, you wanted revenge. Now you want justice. Revenge is about the past. Justice is about the future." Olivia looked at the folder of documents on her desk. "I have resources. I have influence. I have a platform. If I don't use them to help other women, what's the point?" James smiled. "Your grandmother would be proud." "I hope so. I hope my mother would be too. And most importantly," Olivia stood and walked to the window, "I hope Grace will be proud someday, when she's old enough to understand." Outside, the city sparkled with a million lights. A year ago, Olivia had looked at this same skyline and seen a cage. Now she saw possibility. The phone on her desk buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Grace refuses to go to sleep. She keeps saying, 'Mama, mama, mama.' I think she misses you." Olivia smiled and typed back, "On my way." She gathered her things and said goodnight to James and Marcus. At the elevator, she paused and looked back at her office. Her grandmother's office. Her office now. So much had changed, so much was still changing, but some things remained constant. The love she had for her daughter, the friendships that had sustained her through the darkness, the determination to use her second chance for something meaningful. She had been destroyed once, burned down to nothing, lost everything she thought mattered. But here is the final truth about fire. It destroys, yes, but it also clears away the dead wood. It makes room for new growth. It transforms what was into what could be. Olivia Bennet had walked through fire and emerged transformed. She had lost a marriage built on lies and gained a family built on love. She had lost a future she thought she wanted and found a purpose she never expected. She had lost the woman she used to be and discovered the woman she was meant to become. And as she rode the elevator down to street level, stepped out into the cool night air, and hailed a cab to take her home to her daughter, Olivia knew that her story was not over. It was just beginning. Some women are saved by happy endings. Others become the happy ending for themselves and for everyone who comes after. Olivia intended to be the second kind. The cab pulled up to her brownstone. The porch light was on, warm and welcoming. Through the front window, she could see Grace's silhouette, bouncing in Rachel's arms, waiting for her mother to come home. Olivia paid the driver and walked up the steps to her door. Her daughter, her home, her life. Everything she had almost lost. Everything she had fought to keep. She opened the door, and Grace's face lit up like the sunrise. "Mama!" Olivia swept her daughter into her arms and held her close, breathing in the sweet smell of baby shampoo and innocence. "I'm here, baby girl. Mama's here." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Olivia Bennett felt complete. Not because she had won, not because her enemies had lost, but because she had found her way home. And that is how Olivia's story ends, or rather, how it begins again. If her journey touched something in your heart today, do me a small favor. Hit that like button. It tells me you want more stories like this. Drop a comment below. Tell me, what would you have done in her shoes? Share this with a friend who needs to hear that starting over is possible. And if you have not subscribed yet, join our family. We share new stories every week about women who refuse to stay broken. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.